In July of 1799, a French soldier was working on a routine wall repair near the dusty coastal town of Rashid. While clearing away heavy stone rubble, his spade struck a dark, massive slab of rock buried deep in the mud. This single fragment, which we now know as the Rosetta Stone, had 3 distinct bands of ancient text carved into its face. By matching the known Greek script at the bottom with the mysterious hieroglyphs at the top, scholars finally managed to read a language that had been dead for thousands of years. This single find completely changed how we understand the past, effectively handing us the long-lost key to a massive 3,000-year-old empire. Before this breakthrough happened, the giant stone monuments of Egypt were an unreadable puzzle. The immense scale of the pyramids was obvious to anyone looking at them, but the names, dates, and actual stories of the people who built them were entirely lost. The walls of every tomb and temple were covered in thousands of intricate picture symbols, but without a translation, they were treated as simple decoration instead of a real historical record. The names of the great pharaohs had faded into folk tales, and their true achievements were buried deep beneath centuries of drifting sand. We are about to peel back those layers of desert sand to uncover how a simple river valley became the greatest empire the ancient world had ever seen. So sit back, relax, and join us as we journey through the entire history of ancient Egypt. To understand this great ancient civilization, we first have to go back to the very start when the Halfan and Qadan peoples roamed the land. During this older Stone Age, these small groups of hunter-gatherers moved along the outer edges of the valley. They survived by hunting wild animals and harvesting native plants right along the water's edge. Over thousands of years, the climate of North Africa became steadily drier, drying up the surrounding grasslands and forcing these people directly into the Nile Valley. This environmental pressure changed their way of life forever, turning nomadic hunters into permanent farming communities. To see how this new way of life completely changed their world, we must look at the unique landscape of North Africa. Here, the Nile River carved a narrow, incredibly vibrant green corridor directly through thousands of miles of completely barren desert. Without this specific water source, the entire region would have been totally unlivable for humans. The river worked like a massive natural pipeline, carrying water and life into one of the driest, most hostile places on Earth. The creation of this early society depended entirely on the highly predictable rhythm of the annual Nile flood. Every summer, heavy seasonal rains in the distant mountains of East Africa sent a massive surge of water rushing northward down the valley. The river consistently broke its banks, spilling over the flat landscape. It did not cause destructive damage, but instead left behind a thick layer of rich, black mud across the parched fields. When the waters moved back in the autumn, they left behind a highly fertile ground for planting crops. This regular natural cycle allowed wandering groups of humans to finally settle down permanently in one place. We can find clear evidence of this early farming lifestyle in the Fayum Oasis, a large natural basin located just southeast of the Giza Plateau. Around 6000 BC, a distinct group known as the Fayum established permanent villages along the shores of a massive lake. These people were among the very first in Egypt to raise sheep, goats, and cattle. They began making basic pottery, weaving straw baskets, and growing wheat and barley on a highly organized scale. The most impressive development within the Fayum community was the clever way they stored their food. They dug large, straw-lined storage pits directly into the earth beneath their homes. These underground silos allowed them to keep their grain safe from pests, dampness, and weather changes. Having a reliable extra supply of food meant the community no longer faced the constant threat of seasonal starvation. As these storage networks expanded, the community needed leadership to manage the shared resources, which led directly to the rise of the first tribal chieftains. As populations grew, simple mud huts slowly expanded into busy trading villages. But these full grain stores and animal herds quickly caught the attention of hungry outsiders wandering the deep desert. To protect their hard work, the farmers had to organize, a step that would eventually split the region into 2 distinct northern and southern kingdoms. To see this division clearly, we can look at an ancient map and find two completely different worlds sharing the exact same river. In the north, where the Nile spreads out like a giant green fan before meeting the sea, lay Lower Egypt. This was a massive, open marshland filled with fields, busy trading ports, and easy access to foreign neighbors. The people here were mostly wealthy farmers and sailors who wore a distinctive red crown. Because the delta was so wide and broken up by dozens of winding river paths, people lived in independent, spread-out communities that focused heavily on trading goods across the open water. If we travel upstream from these northern marshes, the entire landscape changes into something completely different. Upper Egypt was a narrow, rocky valley, hemmed in by towering desert cliffs. Life here was far more rugged, forcing the population to become tough and highly competitive. These southern people wore a stark white crown. Because they were trapped on a thin strip of green land between walls of solid stone, they had to develop organized ways to manage their water rights and guard their borders. For centuries, these two regions viewed each other with deep suspicion, separated by geography, lifestyle, and local traditions. The river kept them close, but their everyday lives kept them worlds apart. As generations passed, these separate villages slowly started joining together into larger, more organized groups. Archaeologists look back at this long pre-unification era and see three main power hubs growing in the rocky south. These were no longer just simple farming communities, but early regional centers where powerful families started hoarding serious wealth. Excavations in the south have uncovered large, specialized workshops and ancient cemeteries where rulers were buried with valuable copper weapons, beautiful pottery, and rare stones brought in from distant lands. This tells us that long before a single king ruled the entire Nile, a powerful southern elite was already figuring out how to collect taxes and run a structured society. While the south was becoming more focused on military power, the northern delta was doing things its own way. Deep in the northern marshlands, archaeologists have found unique underground homes and large storage spaces that show the delta people were trading heavily with neighbors in the Middle East. But unlike the aggressive southern kingdoms, the north buried their dead in very simple, modest graves. This massive cultural difference meant a peaceful merger was never going to happen. Driven by a booming population and a desire to control the entire length of the river trade routes, the southern warriors began pushing their borders steadily northward, setting the stage for a massive clash. Everything changed around 3000 BC, when a powerful leader from the south marched his army north to break that old divide for good. His name was King Narmer. We know his story today because archaeologists dug up a remarkable shield-shaped stone slab known as the Narmer Palette. This heavy, dark rock is covered in detailed carvings that read like a front-page news report from the ancient world. It wasn't a standard piece of kitchen pottery, but a major political monument designed to celebrate an event that changed human history forever. If we look closely at the carvings, the sheer force of Narmer's victory is hard to miss. On one side of the stone, Narmer is carved as a giant, imposing figure with his weapon raised high, about to strike down a kneeling northern captive. He is wearing the white crown of the south, proudly showing his origins. Below his feet, his enemies lie dead, while a carving of a falcon god holds a bundle of marsh plants, showing the absolute conquest of the northern delta. It is a direct, brutal record of a war that smashed the old regional borders and forced two completely different cultures into a single nation. When we flip the stone over, we see what happened immediately after the battle. Narmer is shown marching in a victory parade alongside his banner bearers to view the rows of decapitated northern enemies. But the most important detail is right on the king's head. He is no longer wearing his southern crown. Instead, he is wearing the red crown of Lower Egypt. By showing the exact same king wearing both crowns on a single stone monument, the palette gives us our very first definitive proof of a unified country under one ruler. To show everyone that the war was truly over, Narmer did something brilliant with his appearance. He took the white crown of the south and the red crown of the north and physically joined them together into a single, layered headpiece. This brand new double crown sent a clear message to every single person living along the river. Narmer was no longer just a regional warlord, but the absolute master of the two lands. This clever move created the very idea of the pharaoh, turning a military leader into a living god on earth, who was responsible for keeping the entire universe in perfect balance. With a unified nation, the new pharaoh needed a fresh base of operations to run his empire. He picked a strategic spot, right where the narrow southern valley opens up into the wide northern delta. Here, Narmer built the city of Memphis, the very first capital of Egypt. It was a massive logistical triumph, built to serve as a central hub for collecting taxes, storing grain reserves, and controlling all the trade moving up and down the river. For reference, modern capitals are built to centralize government control, and Memphis did this so perfectly that it remained the beating heart of Egyptian power for centuries. The creation of Memphis completely changed the course of human history along the Nile. With the two lands finally welded together under the absolute command of a single living god, the endless internal wars came to an end. The immense wealth of the entire river valley was now pouring into a single royal treasury, giving the pharaoh total control over thousands of workers. The era of simple mud villages was officially over, and the newly united kingdom now had the centralized power. The organized labor and the grand scale needed to start carving the landscape into massive stone monuments. The great architectural breakthrough happened during the reign of a king named Djoser, who ruled around 2600 BC. He appointed a brilliant chief assistant named Imhotep, a man who would completely change how the ancient world built out of stone. Imhotep looked at the traditional low-mud grave and decided to try an experimental design at the burial site of Saqqara. Instead of building just one flat structure out of mud, he used thousands of heavy limestone blocks to stack 6 smaller stone boxes directly on top of one another. The result was the step pyramid of Djoser, a towering stone mountain that rose nearly 200 feet into the air, transforming a flat grave into a monumental landmark. This early success sparked a period of intense experimentation, though the path to building a perfect pyramid was filled with spectacular failures. A few generations later, a pharaoh named Sneferu came to the throne, and his builders pushed the limits of engineering a bit too far. His first major project was at a site called Medum, where workers attempted to build a smooth-sided pyramid by adding an outer layer of fine limestone over a stepped core. However, the builders did not properly anchor the outer layers to the base. During construction, the massive outer walls lost their grip on the inner core and slid down the sides, leaving behind a ruined, tower-like stone core surrounded by a vast mountain of rubble. Undeterred by the disaster at Medum, Sneferu immediately ordered his work crews to start building a second monument at a nearby site called Dashur. This project is known today as the Bent Pyramid, and it offers us a fascinating look at ancient crisis management. The builders started the construction at a very steep angle, but as the stone structure grew taller, the immense weight began creating deep cracks in the internal rooms. Realizing the entire building was on the verge of collapsing under its own weight, the architects had to make an emergency adjustment halfway up. They noticeably flattened the angle of the upper half, giving the monument its famously distorted, bent appearance. Sneferu was determined to get a perfect monument before the end of his life, so he ordered his teams to build a third pyramid nearby. Learning from their previous structural mistakes, the architects started this project at a safer, gentler angle from the very ground up. This monument, built out of local red limestone blocks, became known as the Red Pyramid. It stood as the first successful, true, smooth-sided pyramid in human history. Through decades of trial and error, Sneferu's builders had systematically worked out the exact rules needed to safely balance millions of tons of heavy stone, creating the blueprint that would soon change the face of the Giza Plateau. Sneferu's son, a pharaoh named Khufu, used these hard-earned construction lessons to build the most iconic monument of the ancient world, the Great Pyramid of Giza. The sheer scale of this project is difficult to comprehend. Workers had to cut, move, and precisely place roughly 2 million individual stone blocks, with the entire structure weighing an estimated 6 million tons. For reference, a modern industrial construction crane can usually lift around 20 tons at a time, yet the ancient Egyptians were moving these massive weights using nothing but ropes, wooden rollers, copper chisels, and pure human muscle. The real engineering mystery becomes apparent when we look closely at the central burial room deep inside the Great Pyramid. The ceiling of this room is held up by massive granite beams that weigh up to 80 tons each. These giant blocks were not sourced locally. Workers had to transport them from the stone quarries of Aswan, located more than 500 miles upstream. Modern experimental teams have repeatedly tried to replicate this process using primitive tools, but they have consistently struggled to cut the tough granite or move the multi-ton blocks with any real speed or precision. The fact that the ancient builders managed to lift these massive blocks hundreds of feet into the air and set them with absolute precision remains a staggering achievement. Running a project of this size required an enormous, highly structured network of people. For a long time, old historical accounts claimed that the pyramids were built by thousands of mistreated slaves working under a cruel regime. However, modern excavations at Giza have completely exposed that story as a myth. Archaeologists have dug up an entire lost city built specifically for the pyramid workers, located just outside the main construction site. The remains show that the builders were actually well-housed, well-fed, and highly skilled laborers who were called in from farming villages all across the country. The excavation of this worker village has provided incredible details about their daily lives. Examination of the animal bones left behind reveals that the workers were fed thousands of pounds of prime beef, sheep, and goat meat every single day, a high-protein diet that would have been an incredible luxury for an ordinary ancient farmer. They also had access to a highly organized medical system. Researchers examining the skeletons of the laborers have found clear evidence of successfully set, broken bones, advanced amputations, and even complex surgeries that healed cleanly, showing that the pharaoh provided his workforce with the absolute best care available at the time. This massive building project functioned as a highly effective national program that bound the entire population directly to the central government. Every year, when the annual Nile flood covered the farming fields and made ordinary agricultural work impossible, thousands of young men were drafted into royal service. They traveled to Giza to work on the pharaoh's eternal home, living and working alongside people from distant parts of the country. This shared labor pool unified the state's economy, trade routes, and national identity under the absolute direction of the pharaoh, turning a collection of separate farming regions into a highly focused machine. However, sustaining this level of monumental building over several generations came with an incredibly heavy price tag. The sheer material cost of feeding thousands of workers, importing foreign luxury goods, and maintaining the grand funerary services of deceased kings slowly began to take a toll. As the centuries rolled on, more and more of the nation's wealth was permanently locked away in these massive stone tombs, steadily draining the resources of the central royal treasury at Memphis. The kingdom was functioning at its absolute limit, leaving the entire society highly vulnerable. However, the breaking point for this great stone-building empire did not come from an invading army, but from a sudden change in the weather. Around 2200 BC, the regular rains in East Africa began to fail, causing the annual summer floods of the Nile to dry up for decades. Without the vital water and fresh black mud, the farming heart of the country completely stopped beating. The green fields turned into cracked desert earth, and the large grain storehouses fell completely empty. For reference, modern droughts can devastate entire countries even with global trade networks, so we can see how an isolated ancient world, entirely dependent on a single river, would fall into total chaos when that river failed to rise. As food became hard to find, the central government in the capital city of Memphis lost all control over the nation. The reigning pharaoh, an elderly king named Pepi II, who had ruled for over 90 years, could no longer enforce his laws or feed his people. Because the living god in the capital could no longer guarantee the survival of the country, local leaders decided to take matters into their own hands. These regional governors had spent generations managing individual provinces for the king, but they now broke away from Memphis entirely. They stopped sending taxes to the capital and instead kept all their local food supplies to secure their own private territories. This sudden split transformed Egypt into a dangerous landscape of competing warlords. Every regional governor raised a private militia to guard his province's grain silos and steal water rights from neighbors further down the river. The country fell into a long civil war, with rival factions fighting brutal battles for control over the dwindling fertile land along the riverbanks. Archaeologists digging up graves from this specific era have found a clear shift in the evidence, with a sudden appearance of mass graves containing skeletons that show clear signs of violent injuries, alongside a massive spike in the production of cheap copper daggers and battle axes. The physical collapse of the state was accompanied by a deep mental crisis that shook the entire population. For centuries, the entire Egyptian world had been built around a core belief in perfect cosmic order, justice, and stability. The people genuinely believed that the pharaoh's presence guaranteed this divine balance, but the ongoing famine and warfare proved that the old system had completely failed. We can read about this national trauma today in surviving papyrus scrolls from the era, such as a famous old text known as the Admonitions of Ippur. This ancient text provides a direct description of a world turned completely upside down. The writer records that the river had literally turned to blood, meaning it was unlivable and muddy, while common thieves had broken into the royal tombs to strip away the gold of the ancient pharaohs. The text explains that high-ranking nobles were wandering the streets in rags, while poor laborers had taken over the palaces of the wealthy. It reveals a deeply traumatized society where ordinary people could no longer trust the old religious promises, and where the rule of law had been entirely replaced by survival of the fittest. While the old capital of Memphis lay in ruins and the northern delta fell into poverty, the center of power slowly began to shift further south. Down in the narrow valley of Upper Egypt, two major regional power bases emerged from the chaos. In the north, a family of warlords based in the city of Heracleopolis claimed the royal titles of the pharaoh, attempting to rule over the northern half of the country. However, their claim was directly challenged by a tough, deeply militaristic family of local rulers based in the southern city of Thebes. This southern family had spent decades fighting off desert tribes and securing their control over the valuable trade routes leading into the deep south. The conflict between these two rival dynasties dragged on for over a century, keeping the nation completely divided. The northern kings held the traditional farming lands, but the southern Theban rulers possessed a highly disciplined army of archers and seasoned warriors who had been hardened by decades of constant border warfare. These southern leaders were determined to eliminate the northern pretenders and reclaim the entire length of the river under a single crown. The man who finally ended the dark ages of civil war was a southern warrior named Mentuhotep II. Instead of moving his court back north to the traditional capital of Memphis, he made a bold statement by choosing his own hometown of Thebes as the new center of power. This city, located deep in the southern valley, quickly transformed from a rugged military outpost into a sprawling capital hub. By keeping the main government in the south, the new family of kings could closely watch the trade routes and resources that had originally helped them win the war. This major shift marked the official start of the Middle Kingdom, a period that we often look back on as Egypt's classical golden age. To secure his rule, Mentuhotep II had to deal with the independent local governors who had caused so much trouble during the civil wars. He did this by placing highly loyal southern officials into key positions across the country, slowly stripping the old northern families of their rights. We can track this political shift by looking at the tombs of these local leaders. In the early part of the Middle Kingdom, governors were still buried in grand, rock-cut tombs in their own local districts, showing they still held significant power. But as the pharaohs at Thebes grew stronger, these lavish local tombs completely disappeared, proving that the central government had successfully pulled all the power back into the hands of the king. With the country firmly put back together, the pharaohs completely changed their approach to ruling. They looked back at the old kingdom and realized that building giant pyramids had practically bankrupted the central government and exhausted the population. Because of this, the kings of the Middle Kingdom shifted their attention away from grand monuments for the dead and focused entirely on massive building projects for the living. They turned the state's attention toward practical engineering, aiming to secure the food supply and make sure a catastrophic famine would never happen again. The greatest example of this new focus took place back at the Fayum Oasis, the natural lake basin we visited earlier in our journey. A line of brilliant kings launched a truly massive land project by building a series of wide canals, dams, and water gates to control the flow of the Nile into the lake. For reference, modern environmental engineers use heavy machinery and computers to redirect river systems, but these ancient workers managed to do it entirely by hand with simple tools. They dug a massive channel that successfully redirected a portion of the floodwaters. This project effectively drained a massive chunk of the ancient swamp, creating tens of thousands of acres of brand new, incredibly fertile farmland that could easily feed the growing population. To protect this newly created farming paradise and secure the state's wealth, the Middle Kingdom pharaohs established a highly clever network of military forts. Instead of building massive pyramids near the capital, they spent their resources constructing giant mud brick fortresses along the southern border. These were not just simple guard towers. They were massive, highly engineered military bases, complete with thick walls, defensive ditches, and covered walkways down to the river. Detailed logs written on papyrus show that these bases functioned as highly organized checkpoints that monitored every single boat moving up and down the Nile, ensuring that all trade goods were strictly taxed and regulated by the royal treasury. While the physical landscape was being reshaped by these canals and fortresses, an equally massive change was happening within Egyptian religion. In the past, ordinary people believed that only the pharaoh could expect to survive death and enjoy an eternal life among the stars. The Middle Kingdom completely broke this old royal monopoly, an event that fundamentally changed the afterlife. Instead of royal privileges, new religious texts were painted directly onto the wooden coffins of ordinary citizens. These coffin texts provided anyone who could afford a proper burial with the spells and maps needed to safely navigate the dangerous underworld. This spiritual shift completely changed how regular citizens viewed their place in the world. Entering the afterlife was no longer about how big your stone tomb was, but about how you had actually lived your life on earth. Every soul now had to face a final judgment in the hall of the god Osiris, where their heart would be weighed on a scale against the feather of truth and justice. If a person had lived a good, honest life, they were granted access to the eternal paradise of the reed fields, regardless of whether they were a wealthy noble or a humble farming peasant. This moral requirement gave ordinary people a profound sense of personal dignity and religious purpose that had never existed during the Pyramid Age. This new cultural openness triggered a massive explosion in the arts, creating a true golden age for Egyptian literature. For the first time, writers were not just carving dry lists of royal victories on temple walls. They were writing complex stories, deep poetry, and life teachings on portable papyrus scrolls. Some of these works, like the famous story of Sinuhe, became massive literary hits that were copied by school students for hundreds of years. This classic story follows a royal court official who flees Egypt during a political crisis, lives a prosperous life among the tribes of Canaan, but ultimately longs to return home to be buried properly in his native soil. These tales were beautifully written, but they also served as highly effective political tools, designed to make the population feel deeply loyal to the pharaoh and the stability of the throne. The government also used this flourishing literary scene to spread clever political messages across the reunited land. Texts like the prophecies of Neferti were written to look like old predictions made centuries earlier, warning of a terrible time when the land would fall into chaos until a savior king from the south arrived to restore order. By reading these dramatic stories, the public was constantly reminded of the dark times of the civil wars, making them far more willing to accept the absolute rule and heavy taxation of the current pharaohs in exchange for lasting peace. While the people of Egypt were looking inward to perfect their arts, laws, and farming techniques, a quiet change was happening right along their northern borders. The incredible wealth of the newly drained farming fields and the stable, peaceful atmosphere along the Nile made the country an incredibly attractive place for outsiders. For decades, small groups of people from the eastern deserts of Canaan had been moving across the borders into the northern delta, looking for work or fleeing seasonal droughts in their own lands. At first, the Egyptian authorities paid little attention to this slow, peaceful migration, viewing the newcomers as nothing more than handy farm workers and simple cattle herders. But over several generations, this quiet movement of people slowly changed everything. Picture an outside group moving into a wealthy country, not with weapons or a massive army, but by simply settling down and mixing into the local neighborhoods. This is exactly what happened in the northern delta as the Middle Kingdom began to weaken. These newcomers were known to the Egyptians as the Hyksos, a name that simply means rulers of foreign lands. They came from the region we know today as the Middle East, and they did not launch a sudden invasion. Instead, they took advantage of a long line of short-lived pharaohs and a failing central government to slowly expand their influence, eventually establishing their own thriving capital city at a site called Avaris. For a long time, old history books claim the Hyksos violently swept into Egypt and burned its cities to the ground. However, modern archaeological digs at Avaris have painted a completely different picture of this takeover. Archaeologists digging beneath the soil have uncovered thousands of houses, graves, and everyday items that show a gradual blending of cultures. The pottery, the styles of the houses, and even the burial customs from this era match those from the Middle East, showing that the Hyksos had fully made themselves at home in the delta. As their numbers grew, they simply filled the empty space left by the collapsing Egyptian court, appointing their own kings to rule the north without fighting a single major battle. The real shock to the native Egyptian identity came from the advanced technology these foreign rulers brought with them. For thousands of years, Egyptian soldiers had fought on foot, using simple copper axes, wooden clubs, and basic bows. The Hyksos completely disrupted this old way of warfare by introducing weapons the Egyptians had never seen before. They brought in the composite bow, which was made of layered wood, horn, and animal sinew, giving it far more power and range than a traditional wooden bow. They also introduced tougher bronze daggers, swords with curved blades, and protective body armor that made their warriors incredibly difficult to defeat in close combat. But the most revolutionary weapon the Hyksos brought across the border was the horse-drawn chariot. This was a lightweight, fast wooden platform on wheels, pulled by 2 horses and carrying a driver and an archer. For reference, a modern military vehicle relies on speed and armor to dominate a space, and the ancient chariot provided that exact same advantage on the flat plains of the delta. The native Egyptian foot soldiers had no effective defense against a line of fast-moving chariots firing high-powered bows, a stark military reality that allowed the Hyksos kings to firmly lock down their control over the entire northern half of the country. This foreign takeover split the once mighty empire into 3 separate, competing pieces. The Hyksos controlled the wealthy northern delta from their capital at Avaris, adopting Egyptian titles and worshipping local gods to make their rule look legitimate. Down in the south, a weak native Egyptian dynasty managed to hang on to power in the old city of Thebes, but they were forced to pay heavy taxes to their foreign masters in the north. Further south, beyond the river borders, a powerful independent kingdom known as Kush grew up, trading heavily with the Hyksos and putting the Theban Egyptians in a dangerous political squeeze. We can see how stressful this 3-way split was by looking at surviving letters and monuments from the period. The Hyksos king in the north sent insulting messages to the Egyptian prince in Thebes, famously complaining that the roaring of the sacred hippopotamuses in the southern pools was keeping him awake hundreds of miles away in the delta. This bizarre complaint was a clear power move, designed to remind the southern rulers that they were being watched and controlled. The native Egyptians found themselves trapped in a thin slice of the river valley, surrounded by a wealthy foreign kingdom in the north, and an aggressive power in the south. This period of division lasted for over a century, but the constant humiliation eventually forced the southern rulers to make a desperate choice. The Theban princes realized that if they wanted to survive, they had to stop relying on their ancient traditions and adapt to the changing world. They began secretly buying horses, building their own workshops to forge bronze weapons, and training their men to master the complex art of driving chariots. Driven by a desire for survival, the Theban royal family began preparing to turn these newly adopted foreign weapons against the very people who had brought them into the Nile Valley, setting the stage for a brutal war of absolute liberation. The long preparation paid off when a young, determined prince named Ahmose I launched a war to take back his country. Using the very horses, bronze weapons, and chariots they had taken from their enemies, the southern army systematically pushed the Hyksos back up the river. After a series of brutal battles on both land and water, Ahmose surrounded the foreign capital of Avaris and broke through its heavy defenses. He chased the retreating forces completely out of the delta and deep into the borders of the Middle East, securing the northern border for good. This massive victory reunited the country and marked the beginning of the New Kingdom, a time when Egypt decided it would never let itself be vulnerable to an outside invasion again. To ensure their safety, the pharaohs completely abandoned their old policy of staying safely inside their own river valley. Under Ahmose and the kings who followed him, the country transformed into a highly aggressive warrior state. The Egyptian military became a professional, standing army that marched out across the deserts to conquer neighboring lands before those neighbors could ever threaten Egypt. They pushed deep into the Middle East and took over vast territories in the south, creating a massive safety zone around their borders. All the riches, prisoners, and resources from these conquered lands began pouring back down the river, making the pharaohs wealthier and more powerful than anyone had ever seen before. As this wealth built up, a highly unusual situation developed in the royal court at Thebes. When the reigning pharaoh died, the rightful male heir to the throne was far too young to rule on his own. His stepmother, a royal woman named Hatshepsut, stepped in to manage the country. But she had no intention of just holding the seat for someone else, so she took the unprecedented step of declaring herself full pharaoh. To make her rule acceptable to the public, she was shown in temple carvings, wearing the traditional royal kilt and even the false beard of the kings, claiming she was the direct child of the supreme god Amun. Instead of launching massive military campaigns, Hatshepsut focused the power of the empire on building up international trade routes. She funded a legendary sea expedition down the coast of Africa to a wealthy land known as Punt. Her ships returned to Egypt heavily loaded with exotic treasures, including gold, ivory, wild animal skins, and living frankincense trees that were planted directly in the capital city. This massive trade wealth allowed her to fund some of the most beautiful building projects in the ancient world, completely changing the face of Egyptian architecture. Her absolute masterpiece was her mortuary temple, built at a site called Deir el-Bahari. Nestled right up against a towering cliff wall, this breathtaking structure features 3 massive, flat floors connected by long, grand ramps. The design was entirely clean and geometric, blending into the natural lines of the massive desert mountains behind it. For reference, modern architecture highly values buildings that match the surrounding landscape, and Hatshepsut's builders managed to achieve this look, using nothing but human muscle and simple stone chisels, carving columns and rooms directly into the living rock face. When Hatshepsut died, her stepson, Thutmose III, finally took his rightful place on the throne, and he immediately set out to prove his own military power. He was a brilliant commander who historians often call the Napoleon of Egypt, due to his flawless battlefield record. Over the course of 20 years, he led 17 different military campaigns into the Middle East, never losing a single encounter. His most famous victory took place at the Battle of Megiddo, where he caught a massive alliance of enemy kings completely by surprise by marching his entire army through a narrow, treacherous mountain pass that his generals thought was far too dangerous. Thutmose III pushed the borders of the Egyptian empire to their absolute limits, marching his armies all the way to the banks of the Euphrates River. He conquered hundreds of cities, took total control of the major trade routes, and forced dozens of foreign kings to pay heavy annual taxes to the Egyptian treasury. Every year, massive shipments of silver, copper, timber, and grain arrived at the capital, turning Egypt into a true global superpower. The sheer scale of his conquests meant that the pharaoh now controlled everything from the deep forests of Lebanon down to the gold mines of Nubia. This incredible influx of wealth and international power forced the pharaohs to make a radical change to how they buried their dead. The kings looked back at the old history books and realized that every single pyramid built by their ancestors had been completely broken into and cleaned out by tomb robbers. The giant stone structures were simply too obvious, acting like massive signs in the desert that told thieves exactly where the royal gold was hidden. The rulers of the new kingdom decided they needed a completely different approach to secure their treasures for the afterlife. To solve this problem, they completely stopped building visible pyramids, and instead looked for a hidden location. They chose a remote, lonely valley on the west bank of the Nile at Thebes, located right beneath a natural mountain peak that looked remarkably like a giant pyramid. This hidden location became known as the Valley of the Kings. Instead of building upward with stone blocks, workers spent months using copper chisels to tunnel deep into the solid limestone cliffs, carving out long underground corridors, deep staircases, and massive burial rooms hidden beneath the valley floor. The secrecy of these tombs was guarded with absolute care by a select group of elite guards. The entrances to the tunnels were completely filled with desert rubble and hidden to match the surrounding rocky cliffs, making them look like ordinary valley walls. Inside these hidden rooms, the pharaohs were buried alongside tons of solid gold coffins, beautiful jewelry, and priceless treasures. The system was designed to keep the royal resting places completely secret from the outside world, ensuring the pharaohs could rest undisturbed, surrounded by their vast wealth. With their tombs hidden safely in the cliffs and their armies dominating the ancient world, the pharaohs of the new kingdom reached the absolute peak of human power. The empire was incredibly wealthy, the borders were completely secure, and the population was deeply loyal to the traditional gods who had given them this golden age. But just as everything seemed completely stable, a strange threat began to grow right inside the walls of the royal palace. At the absolute height of its military and economic power, the empire faced an internal challenge that nearly destroyed it from within. Imagine a leader using his absolute power to completely shut down every church, temple, and religious center in his country overnight. Around 1350 BC, a new pharaoh named Amenhotep IV came to the throne and did exactly that to the ancient world. For thousands of years, the people of Egypt had worshipped a large family of traditional gods, with a chief god sitting firmly at the top. But this new pharaoh decided to completely ban the old religion. He legally got rid of the traditional gods, smashed their statues, closed down their wealthy temples, and declared that there was only one true God in the entire universe. This single god was represented as a simple sun disk stretching down with long, thin rays that ended in tiny human hands holding the key of life. To show his total dedication to this new faith, the pharaoh changed his own royal name to Akhenaten, which meant the one who is useful to the sun disk. This was the first recorded time in history that a state leader forced an entire nation to follow a single god. The sudden change sent shockwaves through every layer of society, turning the powerful priests into instant outlaws and making the everyday traditions of the regular citizens completely illegal. To break away from the past, Akhenaten realized he had to leave the old capital city of Thebes behind, where the memories of the traditional gods were built into every stone wall. He marched his court hundreds of miles north into a completely empty, dry stretch of the desert and ordered his workers to build a brand new capital city from scratch. Because he wanted the city finished as quickly as possible, his builders had to completely abandon the old method of cutting massive stone blocks, which took months to transport. Instead, they invented a new system using small, lightweight mud bricks that a single worker could easily carry, allowing them to throw up grand palaces, open-air sun temples, and wide villas in just a few short years. While this new city was rising out of the sand, Akhenaten launched another shocking change in the world of royal art. For centuries, Egyptian pharaohs had always been shown in statues as perfectly muscular, young, and flawless warriors who looked more like gods than real human beings. Akhenaten threw out these strict old rules and forced his artists to draw the human body with a strange, distorted look. In these new carvings, the pharaoh is shown with a long skull, a very long neck, droopy eyelids, a narrow chest, wide hips, and a soft, swollen belly. Even his beautiful wife, Nefertiti, and their young daughters were drawn with these same long features, creating a style that looked completely different from anything Egypt had ever created before. This strange experiment completely ruled the country for nearly 20 years, but the entire system was held together solely by the absolute will of the king. When Akhenaten suddenly died, his revolutionary world crumbled almost immediately. A young boy named Tutankhamun was placed on the throne at just 9 years old. Under the heavy influence of the old military generals and the surviving priests, the boy king was forced to reverse his father's religious laws. He changed his name to honor the old chief god, abandoned the desert city to rot in the sun, and officially reopened the traditional temples across the land. But the story did not end with a simple return to the old ways. Once the traditional authorities got their power back, they launched a massive, coordinated effort to completely erase the memory of Akhenaten from history. Military commanders took control of the government and sent out work crews to systematically tear down the sun temples. They used the old bricks as packing material inside the walls of other buildings and chiseled Akhenaten's name and face off every single wall, statue, and tomb they could find. When the later scribes wrote down the official master lists of Egypt's pharaohs, they completely skipped over Akhenaten's entire reign, treating it as a cursed blank spot in time that was never supposed to be spoken of again. With the old gods fully restored and the family of the heretic king completely wiped out, the powerful military class firmly seized the royal throne, preparing to lead the newly stabilized nation directly into a massive clash of superpowers on the global stage. The man who would come to define this new era of military might was a young, ambitious general who took the throne as Ramesses II, later known to the world as Ramesses the Great. He inherited a restless empire and quickly found himself marching his armies north into Syria to face a massive rival superpower, the Hittite Empire. Around 1274 BC, these two forces collided at a city called Kadesh in what became one of the largest chariot battles ever fought. Early in the fighting, Ramesses was ambushed and found himself completely cut off from his main army, surrounded by thousands of enemy chariots. Through sheer desperation and heavy fighting, he managed to hold his ground until southern reinforcements arrived to push the Hittites back. When Ramesses returned home, he launched one of the biggest political spin campaigns of the ancient world. He ordered his scribes and artists to cover the walls of nearly every major temple in Egypt, with giant carvings showing him as a lone hero who single-handedly defeated the entire Hittite army. But the real archaeology tells a much more balanced story. While the temple walls in Egypt claimed a total victory, clay tablets dug up in the Hittite capital show that the battle was actually a bloody stalemate that left both empires completely exhausted. Realizing that neither side could completely defeat the other, Ramesses and the Hittite king did something truly historic by signing the world's first official international peace treaty, carving the promises of friendship and mutual defense onto silver plaques. To match his massive military reputation, Ramesses II began building monuments on a scale that Egypt had not seen since the Pyramid Age. His most famous achievement was the Temple of Abu Simbel, carved directly into a solid sandstone cliff face deep in the southern desert. The front of the temple is dominated by 4 colossal statues of Ramesses sitting on a throne, each one rising over 60 feet into the air. The builders aligned the deep inner rooms so perfectly that twice a year, the morning sun would shine directly through the entrance tunnel to light up the statues of the gods hidden deep in the back room. The true difficulty of building Abu Simbel became blindingly clear to the modern world in the 1960s. When the Egyptian government built a massive new dam on the Nile, The rising waters threatened to swallow the ancient temple completely. An international team of modern engineers had to step in, using advanced machinery to carefully cut the entire cliff temple into thousands of heavy blocks, lifting them piece by piece up a mountain and rebuilding the structure exactly as it was. The project took years and cost millions of dollars, which shows just how incredible it was for the ancient workers to carve it by hand out of the living rock face. While Abu Simbel guarded the south, Ramesses spent vast amounts of wealth expanding the Karnak temple complex in the capital city of Thebes. He finished a massive hall filled with over 130 giant stone columns, with the largest ones rising 80 feet high. These columns were so wide that it would take several grown men holding hands just to circle a single one. This giant forest of stone served as a massive display of royal power, designed to show visiting foreign ambassadors that the Egyptian treasury was completely filled with the riches of the world. Ramesses ruled for an incredible 66 years, filling the land with so many statues and children that his name dominated the landscape for generations. But this golden age of wealth and massive building did not last forever. A few decades after the death of Ramesses the Great, a new pharaoh named Ramesses III took the throne and found himself facing a strange, terrifying crisis. The global weather patterns shifted again, causing crop failures and widespread chaos across the Mediterranean. Suddenly, a mysterious, massive alliance of seafaring warriors, known historically as the Sea Peoples, began migrating across the water, burning down entire civilizations and cities along the coast. They completely destroyed the Hittite Empire and several neighboring kingdoms, leaving a trail of smoke and destruction as they moved steadily toward the boundaries of Egypt. Ramesses III knew that if these warriors managed to land their boats in the delta, Egypt would fall just like the other empires. He quickly gathered his foot soldiers and organized a massive defensive strategy. He lined the shores of the delta branches with thousands of archers and hid his own fleet of ships along the banks. When the enemy ships tried to force their way into the narrow river paths, the Egyptian archers rained down thousands of arrows, pinning the attackers down. The hidden Egyptian boats then lunged forward, using long ropes with grappling hooks to snag the enemy ships and pull them over, forcing the sea warriors into a brutal close-up battle that the pharaoh ultimately won. This desperate military victory saved the heart of Egypt from being burned to the ground, but the defense came with a devastating price tag. The royal treasury was completely drained from paying the soldiers and buying weapons, leading to the first recorded worker strike in history, when the tomb builders at Thebes stopped working because their grain payments were months late. Even worse, the mysterious invaders had completely smashed the international trade routes that Egypt relied on for its wealth. The grand trade networks that had connected the ancient world for centuries were completely gone, leaving the entire Bronze Age world to slide down into a dark age of systemic collapse. As the old international world crumbled, the cracks inside Egypt began to split the country apart from the inside. The pharaohs up north in the delta found themselves losing control of the southern half of the river valley. Down in the old capital of Thebes, the high priests of the god Amun had grown incredibly wealthy and powerful, ruling the south like their own private kingdom. They collected their own taxes, ran their own temples, and completely ignored the royal orders coming from the north. This deep split left the once mighty empire highly vulnerable, bringing an end to the new kingdom and starting a long period of decline where the throne of the living gods would repeatedly fall into foreign hands. The first major shift occurred when powerful chieftains from Libya, who had originally settled in the northern delta as hired soldiers, managed to peacefully take over the royal court. But the most dramatic chapter of this era came from the deep south, beyond the old desert borders. For centuries, the native kings of Kush in Nubia had been absorbing Egyptian culture, religion, and traditions. Around 744 BC, a powerful southern king named Piye looked northward and saw an Egypt fractured by local warlords and losing its ancient religious devotion. He launched a massive military trip down the river, not to destroy Egypt, but to save it from its own decay. Piye and his successors are known to history as the Black Pharaohs, and they ruled the land with an intense dedication to the old ways. They did not try to force their own foreign habits on the local population. Instead, they rebuilt the crumbling temples, honored the old chief god Amun, and even brought back the ancient practice of building pyramids for royal burials, constructing dozens of steep stone monuments in their own southern homeland. For several generations, these southern rulers held the country together, acting as the true protectors of traditional Egyptian culture when the native Egyptians themselves had seemingly abandoned the legacy of their ancestors. But this period of stability was cut short by a terrifying new menace marching out of the Middle East. The Assyrian Empire had developed a highly advanced, brutal military machine that relied on disciplined foot soldiers and mass-produced iron weaponry. The iron swords and spears of the Assyrians easily sliced through the softer bronze weapons used by the Egyptian and Nubian armies. Around 663 BC, the Assyrian king launched a furious, unstoppable invasion that drove the Nubian pharaohs out of the country for good. The invaders marched all the way down to the sacred city of Thebes, systematically looting its wealthy temples and burning the ancient capital to the ground in a display of military destruction that shocked the entire region. The Assyrians did not stay long, choosing instead to rule through puppet kings, but the country was now open to constant, outside conquest. A little over a century later, an even larger superpower arrived at the borders. The massive Persian Empire marched across the desert sands in 525 BC and completely defeated the last native Egyptian forces at a major battle on the border. This victory turned the ancient land of the pharaohs into a mere province of a giant global empire ruled from a distant capital in Persia. The proud traditions of the living gods were systematically downgraded to serve the economic interests of foreign emperors. The Persian rulers spent very little time inside the country, viewing the Nile Valley mostly as a massive farm to produce grain and a steady stream of tax money for their treasury. The local priests tried to launch several secret rebellions to reclaim the throne, but these uprisings were repeatedly put down by the massive Persian armies. For centuries, the land of the Nile was ruled by these outside conquerors, with its ancient temples slowly falling into disrepair and its old royal bloodlines completely wiped out. The country had been reduced to a piece of property traded back and forth between rival foreign empires, far removed from the golden days of Khufu or Ramesses the Great. But the ultimate chapter of this ancient civilization would not be written by a Persian governor or a local rebel, but by a young Macedonian king who chose to cross the sea and become a true pharaoh. In 332 BC, Alexander the Great marched his victorious army across the border, and the people of Egypt welcomed him like a hero who had come to rescue them from Persian rule. The Persian rulers had treated the local temples poorly and disrespected the ancient gods, so the Egyptians were eager for a change. Alexander knew that to truly run this ancient land and keep the people peaceful, he could not just act like a foreign conqueror. He had to adopt its deepest spiritual secrets. He made a long, dangerous trek across the burning desert sands to visit a remote temple known as the Oracle of Siwa, located in a lonely oasis near the border of Libya. Inside the dark, isolated shrine, the head priests officially declared him to be the true son of Egypt's chief god, Amun. With his divine status fully confirmed, Alexander traveled back to the coast and founded a brand new port city named Alexandria. He personally marked out the boundaries of the city using grain, designing a massive trading center that connected Egypt directly to the Mediterranean world. Alexandria quickly grew to become the main cultural hub of the region, famous for its giant lighthouse that could be seen from miles out at sea and its massive library that aimed to hold every scroll ever written. When Alexander suddenly died far from home at a young age, his massive empire was instantly torn apart by his generals. A clever and ambitious commander named Ptolemy I grabbed total control over the wealthy Nile Valley. He brought Alexander's body back to Egypt to bury it in a golden coffin, using the dead king's prestige to legitimize his own rule. He crowned himself pharaoh and started a brand new ruling family that would govern Egypt for the next 300 years, an era known as the Ptolemaic dynasty. This new Greek family lived a very isolated lifestyle up in Alexandria, completely refusing to learn the native Egyptian language or mix with the local people. The court spoke Greek and ran the entire country like a private business, designed to squeeze as much wealth as possible out of the farming fields. However, they were very smart politicians, so they spent massive amounts of tax money building gorgeous new temples at sites like Edfu, Dendera, and Philae. They ordered artists to carve statues of the new Greek rulers dressed up in traditional pharaoh robes, wearing the double crown and making offerings to the ancient animal-headed gods to keep the local priests and peasants happy. The final, brilliant ruler of this family was a young queen named Cleopatra VII, who came to power around 51 BC. She was incredibly intelligent and became the only member of her entire 300-year line to actually bother learning the native Egyptian language, which allowed her to speak directly to her subjects without a translator. She inherited a country that was completely broke, deeply divided by family civil wars, and facing a massive threat from the rising power of Rome. Cleopatra realized that Egypt's traditional foot soldiers stood no chance against the tough, highly organized Roman legions, so she decided to use her incredible intellect and personal charm to protect her country's independence. She formed close personal and political alliances with Rome's two most powerful leaders. First, she won the support of Julius Caesar, famously smuggling herself into his palace inside a hemp sack to gain his military backing and defeat her rival brother. Later, after Caesar was assassinated, she formed a legendary partnership with his top general, Mark Antony, successfully using Roman military muscle to secure her own throne and expand Egypt's territories back to their old limits. But Cleopatra's desperate gamble ultimately backfired when a massive civil war broke out inside the Roman Empire itself between Mark Antony and a brilliant cold commander named Octavian. Mark Antony and Cleopatra pooled their ships together to face off against Octavian's forces at the Battle of Actium in 31 BC, a massive naval clash off the coast of Greece. The fight was a complete disaster for the Egyptian forces. Octavian's smaller, faster ships completely broke the combined fleet, and as the battle turned against them, Cleopatra and Antony were forced to abandon their men and flee back to Alexandria. Realizing that the Roman soldiers were marching right up to the city walls, that Mark Antony had taken his own life, and that her dream of an independent Egypt was completely dead, Cleopatra chose to die by her own hand in 30 BC. According to the ancient accounts, she used the deadly bite of a venomous cobra hidden inside a basket of figs to escape the humiliation of being dragged through the streets of Rome in heavy chains as a defeated prisoner. With Cleopatra's death, Octavian completely got rid of the 3,000-year-old throne of the pharaohs and claimed the entire country as his own private property, rather than an ordinary province of the Roman state. He changed his name to Emperor Augustus and locked Egypt down under a strict military rule, banning any Roman senator from even visiting the country without his direct permission. He turned the proud nation into little more than a giant automated farm designed to feed the citizens of Rome with free grain shipments. Every year, massive fleets of cargo ships left Alexandria loaded with Egyptian wheat to keep the Roman population fed and happy. The new Roman rulers had absolutely no interest in keeping the old spiritual traditions of the Nile alive. They viewed the ancient temples purely as tax targets, cutting off all government money to the sanctuaries, and banning the local populations from holding their traditional religious festivals. This sudden cutoff caused a quiet, devastating collapse of the ancient culture. For generations, the complex art of reading and writing, the sacred picture writing, had been taught exclusively to special scribes inside the hidden temple libraries, known as the Houses of Life. But as the old priests died out and the schools were forced to close due to a lack of money, the knowledge of the ancient writing system completely faded away from human memory. The grand stone temple walls, covered in thousands of years of history, royal victories, and old scientific discoveries, were suddenly transformed into silent, unreadable blocks of stone that no living person could understand. By the 4th century AD, only a tiny handful of elderly priests on the remote island of Philae could still write the old scripts. When the last inscription was chiseled into the stone, there in 394 AD, the voices of the pyramid builders went completely silent, bringing a final quiet end to the longest independent civilization in human history.